we've done our zenithal priming. Before we move on to the next bit, we're going to want to mask off the bones at the back so that we don't cover it with paint and lose the highlighting we just did on the next bit. So what I'm getting is silly putty. On the top, it's going to be fairly easy. Just make it nice and thin. Take it in over the top like so. If you have any modelling tools, it's not a bad idea to have something on hand just so that you can tuck it right in and get into all those hard to reach places. Masking's quite a thing when you're airbrushing, though airbrushes can be accurate. You can only do so much, so silly putty is the best thing I've found to mask with, because you can get it really nice and thin, so you can get it into the hard to reach places while it still actually remains with a consistency that you can get it off again. There are paints you can get that are designed as maskers. Pull that down away from the back of his cowl so I can get to that. But you've got to be very cautious with those, and they don't work so well on really detailed textures because they get stuck in them and you really will struggle to get them out again. Or at least that's what I found. You need to put them on very, very thickly, but then you can still have problems. So I'm not so worried about the very tips of things on this. So I'm going to come around and cover them just in case. What I'm more worried about is the bulk of the body around here. I'm hoping that the camera's pointing in roughly the right area and you can see this, because I haven't got a clue right now. These bit of legs are the bits that I'm most concerned about, wanting to A, be able to keep the highlighting on, but B, get out of the way of the next section of airbrushing. If you're buying miniatures that are designed to paint, frequently they come in multiple parts. The annoying thing with these miniatures is if you look at them, they were actually built in multiple parts and they've assembled them for you, which is great for your average board gamer, but not so great for anyone trying to paint them. So again, it's just a case of making sure that I can get to as much of what I need to for spraying while protecting the bulk. And this bit's a pain. But it's not as big a pain as it could be. You don't have to do this. I could have just sprayed it anyway and then come back and not used the airbrushing base that I created for these parts and just then base coated everything without any masking. That would be the easier way to do it, but you'd lose any of the advantages you got from the highlighting on the main piece. So just a little bit over the back there. And that's that bit all done. The metal bit, I'm actually going to paint solid metal, so that doesn't bother me so much. What I am going to do is go and cover the head and some of the spine, because again, it would be nice to be able to keep all of that highlighting work when I come over and redo it in bone white later. Now, these techniques work quite well with larger miniatures. It's not so easy when you're dealing with smaller miniatures, the character miniatures. Because you're dealing with smaller areas, there'd be a lot more masking. So I tend to use it just for the base coat everything, and then do the rest with a brush the way that I would have done traditionally. But I'm still fairly new to airbrushes. I've had this one since Christmas. So I may well find that some of those spines puncture through this as I try and get it out of the way. That's not a problem, because I will almost certainly be going back and individually painting those spines at a later date. So covering them up is not the end of the world. Again, it's mainly the cloth areas I'm worried about here, so if I cover up some of his wrists and his hands, that's not going to upset me too much. Of course, the headache with the fact that I'm thinking of coming back in and therefore airbrushing some of this head will be I will have to reverse this process. And the nice thing with airbrushing is you can still see all of the detail on the miniature. And I've actually taken some photos of it at this stage that I will post with it. The nice thing about that is thin coats, you don't suddenly find the way you do with a rattle can, that most of the detail on the miniature has got that little bit obscured. Not to the point you can't see it, but it's not as highlighted anymore, which makes it harder to paint and slightly less effective. So there are a number of advantages to using an airbrush. There we go. That's that just about ready for the next stage.